Picture this, the year is 1603. You are in a chamber deep within a grand English manor, where the only light bleeds from a bank of flickering candles. The air, thick and heavy, carries the cloying scent of rosewater and cloves, struggling to mask a sharper, metallic temps, like old coins or faint blood. You sit before a vanity of dark, polished oak, the silver of your hand mirror clouded with age. Your brocade gown is a cage of whalebone and silk, its weight a constant reminder of your station. Before you sits a small, ornate pot made of porcelain. It is cool and heavy in your hands as you lift the lid. Inside is a pristine white paste, smooth and opaque as fresh snow. This is Venetian ceruse, the most coveted cosmetic in all of Europe, the secret to the ethereal, moon-like pallor demanded by the court. Dipping a puff of swan's down into the pot, you begin the ritual. You pat the mixture across your face, layer by deliberate layer, watching your own reflection recede. Your freckles vanish, the fine lines around your eyes disappear. Your own warm skin is entombed beneath a perfect, alabaster mask. But then, you lean closer to the mirror, and a small crack appears in yesterday's application near your jawline. Underneath is a glimpse of the truth, a landscape of angry red pustules, weeping sores, and skin eaten away by the very substance you now apply to hide it. This was the silent, agonizing bargain of aristocratic beauty, a slow and elegant poisoning, performed with one's own hands. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this, and please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand the pact these people made, this Faustian bargain for a perfect face, you must first understand the world they inhabited. It was a world carved into brutal hierarchies, where your value, your future, and your very identity were etched onto your skin for all to see. In the sprawling fields and muddy villages, the sun was a merciless tyrant. It beat down upon the backs of the common folk, branding them with the unmistakable mark of labor. A face browned by the sun, hands chapped and reddened by the wind, these were the sigils of the peasantry, a declaration of a life spent in toil. But within the stone walls of the castles and the manicured gardens of the great estates, life was a different matter. Here, in the rarefied air of the aristocracy, to be pale was to be pure. A complexion of milk and pearl was the ultimate symbol of a life lived in leisure, a life untouched by the vulgar necessity of physical work. It whispered of sheltered afternoons spent in shaded drawing rooms, of bloodlines kept pristine and untainted by the lower classes. A woman's pallor was her currency, a testament to her delicate, almost divine, nature. It was the canvas upon which her wealth, her virtue, and her nobility were displayed. This obsession with paleness, however, was haunted by a far more visceral terror. The 16th and 17th centuries were a time when a phantom stalked every home, from the hovel to the palace. This spectre was smallpox. It did not distinguish between rich and poor, saint and sinner. It announced its arrival with fever and aches, and it left its calling card in a biblical scourge of blisters. Those who survived the ordeal were forever marked, their faces transformed into a constellation of pits and craters, a permanent, disfiguring reminder of their brush with death. In a society built on the flawless presentation of the self, these pockmarks were more than scars. They were a social death sentence. They could ruin a young woman's marriage prospects, shatter a courtier's influence, and turn a celebrated beauty into a recluse overnight. The face, once a source of pride and power, became a landscape of shame. People would hide behind veils, retreat into seclusion, their confidence and status eroded by the disease's cruel artistry. Into this world of rigid class structure and mortal fear stepped a figure who would define the aesthetic for an entire era, Queen Elizabeth I of England. As she aged, having survived a severe bout of smallpox in her late 20s that left her scarred, she began to construct an image of eternal power. She was the Virgin Queen, a monarch married to her nation, and her face became a political tool. She cultivated an iconographic look, a stark, unearthly white face, a blood-red lip, and fiery hair, all framed by impossibly elaborate gowns. This was not merely makeup, it was her armor. Her mask of youth projected an image of agelessness and unwavering strength. defying the decay of time and the vulnerabilities of the flesh. Where the queen led, the court followed. An army of aristocrats on both sides of the English Channel began to emulate her otherworldly pallor. The desire for a flawlessly white face became a feverish obsession. But how to achieve it? Early cosmetics were disappointingly translucent. Powders made from ground alabaster or rice flour were clumsy and temporary, dusting off on clothing and offering little coverage for the deep shadows of pockmarks. Ointments made from botanical sources might soothe the skin, but they could not create the opaque, perfect mask that the Elizabethan and Jacobean ideal demanded. The world was desperate for a miracle, and they found it in a substance known as Venetian cerus, or spirits of Saturn. It was a thick, white cosmetic paste, and its key ingredient was white lead. Its properties were, for the time, magical. Unlike other powders, cerus was brilliantly opaque. A single layer could completely obscure freckles, blemishes, and even the most stubborn of scars. It was smooth, easily spread, and when applied correctly, it created a luminous, porcelain finish that could last for days. It was everything the aristocracy had dreamed of, a way to literally paint over their imperfections, to erase the evidence of disease and age, and to sculpt a face that screamed wealth, status, and untouchable purity. They had no true understanding of the danger. The science of the day was a murky soup of alchemy and superstition. Physicians spoke of the four humors and believed disease was caused by imbalances of black bile and phlegm. The concept of chronic transdermal poisoning, of a toxin slowly seeping through the skin to attack the nervous system and internal organs, was utterly alien. Lead, in the form of lead carbonate, was simply seen as a powerful mineral. Indeed, some alchemists and physicians even prescribed lead-based concoctions for medicinal purposes, believing its astringent qualities could heal skin afflictions. They were not fools. They were simply blind, operating within a world that had not yet discovered the language of modern toxicology. And so, with the blessing of a primitive medical establishment and the mandate of royal fashion, the nobility began to paint their faces with poison, believing it to be the very pinnacle of refinement and civilization. Let us imagine a young woman, perhaps her name is Isabella, the daughter of a powerful duke, on the eve of her first appearance at court. The year is 1610. For weeks, the entire household has been a whirlwind of preparation. Gowns have been commissioned, jewels have been polished, and tutors have drilled her in the intricate dance of courtly etiquette: when to curtsy, how low to bow, which topics of conversation were safe, and which were social suicide. But Isabella knows, with the cold certainty that lives in the hearts of ambitious young women, that none of it will matter if her face is not perfect. Her skin is her own. It is the skin of a 17-year-old who has spent her life in the fresh air of a country estate. It carries a faint blush on the cheeks, a light constellation of freckles across the bridge of her nose from a forgotten afternoon in the garden, and a tiny, pale scar above her eyebrow from a childhood fall. It is a human face, alive and warm. And in the merciless theatre of the royal court, it is entirely unacceptable. Her mother, a woman whose own face is a carefully maintained mask of alabaster, understands this. On the morning of the presentation, she enters Isabella's chamber, not with words of encouragement, but with a small, heavy pot of Venetian cerus. It is the finest quality, purchased at an astronomical price from a merchant in Venice. It is presented to Isabella like a sacrament, the final key to her success. The pot is a promise in porcelain. It promises acceptance, admiration, and a desirable marriage. It promises power. The ritual begins. Isabella sits before her mirror as a maidservant opens the pot. The scent that rises is sharp, almost medicinal, a blend of the vinegar used to bind the cosmetic and the faint, sweet, metallic odor of the lead itself. It is the smell of a physician's workshop, not a lady's boudoir. A first, subtle warning that goes unheeded. The maid takes a small brush made of badger hair and begins to paint. The first stroke is a shock. The cerus is cool against Isabella's warm skin, its texture thick and cloying, like a layer of fine, wet plaster. Stroke by stroke, the familiar landscape of her own face begins to disappear. The blush on her cheeks is the first to go, extinguished beneath the relentless white. Then the freckles, one by one, are blotted out of existence. The tiny scar above her brow vanishes as if it had never been. The maid works with the precision of a master artist, smoothing the paste into every pore, every fine line, creating a flawless uniform surface. Isabella watches, her breath held tight in her chest, as her own reflection is methodically erased and replaced by a stranger. When the application is finished, the maid stands back. Isabella leans toward the mirror, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The woman staring back at her is a revelation. She is no longer just Isabella. She is an icon, a creature of myth. Her skin possesses the luminous, unearthly glow of polished marble. In the candlelight, her face seems to float, detached from the flawed, mortal creature beneath it. There are no imperfections. There is no history. There is only a perfect, serene, and intimidating whiteness. And in that moment, Isabella does not feel fear. She feels a surge of exhilarating power. This face is a shield. No one can see if she is nervous. No one can see the flush of embarrassment or the pallor of fear. Her emotions are her own, locked safely behind the mask. She touches her cheek, and the surface is strange, smooth but unnaturally dry, no longer skin but something else entirely. She tries to smile, and feels a faint, crawling tightness, a resistance to the movement of her own muscles. The mask does not want to yield. She mistakes this sensation, not as a sign of danger, but as a sign of its potency, its permanence. To complete the illusion, the maid then uses a feather to trace delicate blue veins onto her temples, a popular technique to suggest a translucent, almost ethereal fragility. A touch of carmine, a pigment derived from crushed insects, is applied to her lips, a slash of brutal red against the stark white. The transformation is complete. As she rises, the weight of her gown and the stiffness of her new face feel like armor. She is ready for battle. She walks out of her chamber and into the grand hallways, her head held high, her expression serene and unreadable. She is beautiful, she is terrifying, and she is utterly unaware that the catalyst of her tragedy is not a single, violent event, but this first, triumphant brushstroke. The poison has been applied, the bargain has been struck, and her long, slow, and elegant decay has just begun. In the first year, the Cirrus was Isabella's devoted servant. It was her shield in the glittering war zone of the court, a flawless mask that purchased her entry into the most exclusive circles. Her marriage prospects, once a matter of anxious speculation, became the subject of envy and gossip. Dukes and earls, mesmerized by her serene, marble-like beauty, vied for her attention. The mask worked. It gave her a confidence she had never known, a stillness, a poise that others mistook for wisdom. The poison was a quiet partner in her ascent, and she was grateful. But even in that first year, the partnership began to show its sinister terms. The daily ritual became a necessity, not a choice. Removing the cirrus was an ordeal. The paste, bound with vinegar and egg white, clung to the skin like a second, hostile layer. Maids would have to use harsh concoctions to dissolve it, lotions of mercury sublimate, another potent poison, or abrasive scrubs of breadcrumbs and donkey's milk. Each night, Isabella's face would emerge from its white shell, not fresh and renewed, but raw, red, and tender. The cirrus, with its powerful drying properties, was slowly leaching the life from her skin. It was an astringent, and it was doing its job too well, tightening her pores until they could no longer breathe, creating a landscape of perpetual irritation. The solution, of course, was never to let the world see the damage, and so, the next morning, the ritual would begin again, the cool, soothing paste, applied over the inflamed skin. The cirrus now served a dual purpose. It was both the creator of her beauty and the concealer of the damage it caused. This was the trap, closing its jaws slowly, almost imperceptibly. Her own face was becoming her enemy, a secret she had to entomb each day. By the third year, the poison began its deeper, more insidious work. It was no longer a superficial tyrant. It had breached the walls of her skin and was now seeping into her bloodstream, beginning its silent, methodical conquest of her body. The first sign was a deep, gnawing ache in her belly, a twisting colic that would seize her without warning, often after a lavish banquet. Her physicians, learned men with velvet robes and grave expressions, diagnosed it as an imbalance of the humors, a classic case of female melancholy. They prescribed bleeding with leeches that left her pale and weak, and foul-tasting purges that only worsened her agony. Then came the headaches. They were not the fleeting pains of a sleepless night, but crushing, relentless waves of pressure behind her eyes, making the candlelight of the ballroom an unbearable torture. Her temper, once even and placid, began to fray. She became prone to sudden, inexplicable fits of rage, lashing out at her maids for the slightest imperfection in her dress, followed by long, desolate periods of weeping in the solitude of her chambers. Her mind, once sharp, grew clouded. She would forget names, lose the thread of conversations, her thoughts turning sluggish and syrupy. At court, this was whispered about as a sign of a delicate, artistic temperament. In reality, it was the lead beginning to corrode her nerves. One evening, while cleaning her teeth with a frayed twig and a powder of crushed bone, she saw it. Leaning close to her silver mirror, she noticed a faint dark line appearing on her gums, just at the base of her teeth. It was a strange bluish-black stain, like a sliver of twilight had been permanently tattooed onto her flesh. She scrubbed at it, frantically, but it would not fade. It was the Burton's line, a telltale sign of chronic lead poisoning, the poison literally manifesting in the tissues of her mouth. It was a horrifying, intimate mark of her decay, and it was a secret she would carry with her to the grave. The years that followed were a long, slow descent into a private hell, all conducted behind the serene white mask that the world still admired. Her body began to betray her in more profound ways. Her beautiful, thick chestnut hair, once her secret pride, began to thin. Each morning, her pillow was a spiderweb of fallen strands. Her teeth, their foundations weakened by the poisoned gums, began to ache and loosen in their sockets. The sweet, cloying scent of her perfume was now a necessary disguise for the faint, foul odor of decay on her breath. The most horrific battlefield, however, remained her face. The skin beneath the cerus was no longer merely irritated. It was a ruined landscape. The constant application of the lead paste had destroyed its texture, leaving it a mottled mess of grey, scarred tissue, pustules, and open sores that refused to heal. The ritual of her toilette became a masterpiece of self-delusion and physical agony. Applying the paste to her raw, weeping skin was a daily act of torture, a searing pain she had to endure with a placid expression. She could feel the poison seeping directly into the open wounds, a chilling sensation that she tried to ignore. She began to knead thicker and thicker layers of the cerus to hide the ever-worsening destruction beneath. Her face was no longer a mask. It was a sarcophagus. Her hands, too, began to fail her. A persistent tremor took hold, making it difficult to hold a wineglass or lift a spoon to her lips. She developed a strange weakness in her wrists, a condition known as wrist drop, another classic symptom of lead-induced nerve damage. She took to wearing elaborate lace-trimmed gloves at all times, not as a fashion statement, but to hide the uncontrollable shaking and the way her hands now limply hung. Isabella, the celebrated beauty, became a recluse. The effort of maintaining the facade was too great. The pain was too constant. Her world shrank to the confines of her lavish, darkened bedchamber. The heavy velvet curtains were always drawn, for the sunlight had become her enemy, cruelly illuminating the cracks and fissures in her painted mask. She was a ghost haunting the architecture of her own life, a silent, suffering creature trapped inside a crumbling statue. Her physicians, utterly baffled, spoke of a withering sickness, or a curse upon her bloodline. They never once looked to the small, elegant porcelain pot on her vanity, the source of all her misery, which she still, out of a desperate, terrified habit, had applied every single day. She had started using it to secure her place in the world. Now, she was a prisoner to it, compelled to continue painting the walls of her own tomb, long after the occupant within was already dead. Isabella's end was not a dramatic, sudden collapse in the middle of a royal ball. It was a slow, quiet fading, like a candle flame starved of air in a sealed room. In her final years, she was a spectre, rarely seen by anyone but her most trusted maid and her increasingly bewildered physicians. The tremors had spread through her limbs, leaving her bedridden. The colic had become a constant, fiery torment in her gut, and she wasted away, her magnificent gowns hanging like empty tapestries on her skeletal frame. Her mind was the last sanctuary to fall. The lead had finally breached the fortress of her sanity, and her thoughts fractured into a kaleidoscope of paranoia and terrifying hallucinations. She would scream at shadows that danced in the corners of her room, convinced they were demons sent to collect her soul. She would whisper conspiratorially to her reflection, her voice a dry rustle of leaves, warning the painted woman in the mirror of the poison that was everywhere in her food, in the water, in the very air she breathed. The irony was a cruelty of which she was completely unaware. She died on a damp autumn morning, at the age of just 32. The official cause was listed as a wasting fever that had finally overwhelmed her delicate constitution. Her maid, performing the final grim task of preparing her body, made a horrifying discovery. As she tried to gently wash Isabella's face, a section of the thick chaton serous flaked away, taking with it a piece of the dead, blackened flesh beneath. Her face, in death, was a grotesque ruin, a testament to the years of silent corrosion. They buried her quickly, in a lead-lined coffin, the final unwitting tribute to the poison that had consumed her. Isabella was not a single, unique victim. She is a ghost, a composite of thousands of forgotten stories. Her tragedy played out in candlelit chambers across England, France, Italy, and Spain for over 2 centuries. The most famous casualty was perhaps Maria Gunning, the Countess of Coventry, a celebrated society beauty in the 18th century, who died at 27. The newspapers of the day were blunt, stating that she was a victim to the immoderate use of white lead. Her death was a public scandal, a moment when the mask briefly slipped, revealing the skull beneath the skin. Yet, even then, the practice continued, the allure of a flawless face too powerful to be deterred by the occasional, inconvenient death. The story of Venetian Cirrus is not merely a macabre footnote in the history of cosmetics. It is a haunting exploration of the brutal lengths to which we will go to conform to an ideal of beauty. It reveals a terrifying intersection of status, science, and vanity, where a lack of knowledge created a perfect environment for a silent, self-inflicted plague. The nobles who painted their faces with lead were not simply foolish or vain. They were prisoners of a rigid social code, armed with a primitive understanding of the world around them. Their desire for a pale complexion was a rational response to the values of their time, a desperate attempt to project an image of power, purity, and invulnerability in a world that was brutal and uncertain. This story echoes through the ages, a chilling reminder that the pursuit of beauty has always had its costs, its hidden poisons. We may have traded lead for less lethal toxins, but the fundamental bargain remains. We still sculpt, inject, filter, and mask ourselves in pursuit of an ideal, often blind to the long-term consequences for our bodies and our minds. The tale of Isabella and the Venetian Cirrus is a whisper from the past, a cautionary tale written on bone and preserved in poisoned earth. It asks us to look in our own mirrors, at the rituals we perform and the masks we wear, and to question the price we are willing to pay for perfection.